The rain fell in sheets across the small town of Pine Grove as the streetlights flickered on one by one. The evening crowd had thinned out at Joe's diner, and Mike Thomas wiped down the last table of his shift. His manager nodded at him with a tired smile. "Go on home, Mike, I know those kids are waiting." Mike glanced at his watch, 8:45 p.m. If he hurried, he might make it home before Zach and Penny fell asleep. He'd missed saying goodnight 3 times this week already, and the guilt weighed on him like a physical burden. He hung up his apron, collected his meager tips, and slipped into his worn jacket that did little to keep out the autumn chill. "See you tomorrow. Same time," he called out, stepping into the rain without waiting for a response. He couldn't afford an umbrella. The money he'd set aside for one had gone to Penny's school project last week. Besides, the walk home was only 15 minutes if he cut through Oakwood Park. The park was empty at this hour. Most sensible people were home with their families or tucked away in warm bars. Mike pulled his collar up against the wind and quickened his pace. His shoes, already worn thin at the soles, squelched with each step. The second-hand store might have affordable replacements, but that would have to wait until after the rent was paid. As he approached the center of the park where 4 pathways met at a small circular plaza, Mike noticed something unusual. On one of the benches sat an elderly woman, completely soaked with a confused expression on her face. She wore an expensive-looking coat that seemed oddly out of place in this part of town, but it provided little protection against the downpour. Mike hesitated. He was already late and his kids were waiting. The babysitter, his elderly neighbor Mrs. Wilson, had already done him a favor by staying late. But something about the woman's lost expression tugged at his conscience. "Excuse me, ma'am? Are you all right?" Mike approached cautiously, not wanting to startle her. The woman looked up, her silver hair plastered to her forehead. Despite her bedraggled appearance, there was a dignity in her posture that spoke of a life lived with confidence. "Oh, hello, young man." Her voice was cultured but trembling slightly. "I seem to have gotten turned around. I was trying to find my way back to my hotel, but nothing looks familiar in this rain." Mike shifted from one foot to another. "Which hotel are you staying at? I can point you in the right direction. The Pinewood Inn, I believe." She fumbled in her pocket and produced a small card. "Yes, that's it." Mike's heart sank. "Ma'am, that's on the other side of town. It's at least 3 miles from here." The woman's shoulders slumped. "Oh dear. And I suppose the buses have stopped running by now." "Last one was at 8:30, Mike confirmed. "And taxis are rare in Pine Grove, especially on rainy nights." They stood in silence as the rain continued to fall. Mike thought of his children waiting at home, of the mountain of bills on his kitchen counter, of the extra shift he'd have to pick up tomorrow. Then he thought of his late wife, Lisa, and what she would have done in this situation. "Look," he said finally, "my place isn't far from here. It's not much, but you're welcome to stay the night on our couch. In the morning, I can help you get back to your hotel." The woman looked at him with surprise. "You'd invite a complete stranger into your home?" Mike smiled ruefully. "My wife always said I was too trusting. But I can't leave you out here in the rain. Besides, you remind me of my grandmother." After a moment's hesitation, the woman nodded gratefully. "That's very kind of you. My name is Eleanor." "Mike," he replied, offering his hand. "Mike Thomas." Together they walked through the rain, Mike adjusting his pace to match Eleanor's slower steps. As they walked, Mike found himself telling her about Pine Grove, pointing out the small bakery that made the best cinnamon rolls on Sundays, and the library where his kids spent Saturday mornings. "You have children?" Eleanor asked, genuine interest in her voice. "2, Mike said, his face softening. "Zach is 10 and Penny just turned 8. They're good kids, better than I deserve, honestly." "I'm sure that's not true," Eleanor said kindly. They turned onto Cedar Street, lined with modest homes and apartment buildings. Mike led Eleanor to a 2-story building with peeling paint and a small, well-kept flower bed by the entrance, Penny's project from last spring. "We're on the 2nd floor," Mike explained as he held the door open. "The elevator's been broken for months, so we'll have to take the stairs. Need any help?" "I may be old, young man, but I'm perfectly capable of climbing a flight of stairs," Eleanor replied with unexpected spirit, making Mike laugh for the first time that day. As they reached the landing, Mike could hear the television through the door of apartment 2B. He fished his keys from his pocket and hesitated. "Just so you know, it's not much," he warned, "and it's a bit of a mess. I wasn't expecting company." Eleanor's eyes crinkled with warmth. I've seen my share of homes over the years, Mike. I promise I won't judge. Mike unlocked the door and called out, "I'm home." The sound of small feet pattering across the floor preceded the appearance of two children. Penny reached him first, her dark hair bouncing as she threw her arms around his waist. Zach followed more slowly, trying to appear grown-up but unable to hide his relief at his father's return. "You're all wet." "Dad?" Penny observed, pulling back with a giggle. "That tends to happen in the rain." "Silly," Mike replied, ruffling her hair. Then, turning to his children, he gestured toward Eleanor. "This is Eleanor. She got lost in the rain, and she's going to stay on our couch tonight. Eleanor, these are my kids, Zach and Penny." The children stared at the newcomer with undisguised curiosity. Mrs. Wilson appeared from the kitchen, drying her hands on a dish towel. "I fed the kids dinner," she reported, "and there's a plate for you in the microwave." "Who's this?" she added, nodding toward Eleanor. After Mike explained the situation, Mrs. Wilson gave Eleanor an appraising look before nodding. "Well, that's good of you, Mike. I'd better get home to my cat. He gets anxious when I'm late." She gathered her things and patted Mike's arm. "Don't forget, you promised to help me with my leaky faucet this weekend." "I won't forget," Mike assured her as she left. Left alone with his children and their unexpected guest, Mike suddenly felt self-conscious about their modest apartment. The furniture was mismatched and worn, the carpet threadbare in spots. Toys were scattered across the living room floor despite his constant reminders to the kids to clean up. "Sorry about the mess," he apologized, hastily gathering some of the toys. "Let me get you a towel, Eleanor. And maybe some dry clothes? I might have something of Lisa's that would fit you." Eleanor waved away his concern. "The towel would be wonderful, but don't worry about clothes. I'll dry out soon enough." While Mike went to fetch the towel, Penny approached Eleanor cautiously. "Are you a princess?" she asked, wide-eyed. "You talk like the princesses in my books." Eleanor laughed, a surprisingly youthful sound. "No, dear, I'm afraid not. Just an old woman who got caught in the rain." "Dad says we should always help people who need it," Zach stated solemnly. "That's why he helped Mrs. Wilson when her cat got stuck in the tree, even though he's scared of heights." Mike returned with a towel and handed it to Eleanor, his cheeks slightly pink. "Kids, why don't you go get ready for bed while I heat up some soup for our guest?" As the children reluctantly left, Mike turned to Eleanor. "The couch pulls out into a bed. It's not the most comfortable, but it's better than a park bench in the rain." "It's perfect," Eleanor assured him. "Your children are lovely. You've raised them well." Mike's expression softened. "I'm trying my best. It hasn't been easy since their mom passed away 3 years ago. Lisa was the heart of our family." In the small kitchen, Mike heated soup and made tea while Eleanor dried her hair. Through the thin walls, they could hear Zach and Penny arguing good-naturedly about whose turn it was to use the bathroom first. The simple domestic sounds filled the apartment with life. As the microwave hummed, Mike glanced at the pile of bills he'd pushed to one side of the counter. Electric, rent, medical bills from Penny's asthma attack last month, and the letter from the community college where he'd been taking night classes when he could afford them. He'd been accepted into their business program, but the tuition seemed like an impossible dream. Mike set these thoughts aside as he carried a steaming bowl of soup and a mug of tea to Eleanor, who was now sitting on the couch looking more comfortable but still somewhat out of place in her expensive clothes. "It's just canned soup," he apologized. "But it's hot." "It's perfect," Eleanor said, accepting the bowl gratefully. "Thank you, Mike. Not many people would take in a stranger these days." Mike shrugged, embarrassed. "I just did what anyone would do." Eleanor's eyes, sharp and perceptive, studied him. "No," she said quietly. "Not just anyone." The small apartment felt different with a stranger in it. After Mike had shown Eleanor where everything was, he'd excused himself to say goodnight to the kids. Now he stood in the doorway of the children's shared bedroom, watching as Penny clutched her worn teddy bear, and Zach pretended he was too old for bedtime stories. "Is the lady going to be okay, Dad?" Penny asked, her eyes wide with concern. "She'll be fine, sweetheart. She just needed a place to stay tonight." "Where's she from?" Zach asked, curiosity overcoming his attempt to seem disinterested. Mike realized he didn't know. "I'm not sure. We didn't talk about that. She talks fancy," Penny observed. "Like my teacher." "Mrs. Harper." "Well, different people talk in different ways," Mike explained. "Now it's late and you both have school tomorrow." He kissed them both goodnight. checked that Penny's nightlight was working. They couldn't afford to replace it if it burned out, and quietly closed the door. For a moment he leaned against the wall, exhaustion washing over him. The day had been long, 6 hours at the hardware store, a quick lunch break spent fixing Mr. Chen's delivery van for extra cash, then 8 hours at the diner. Tomorrow would be the same, except he'd have to get up earlier to help Eleanor find her way back to her hotel. When Mike returned to the living room, he found Eleanor examining the family photos on the wall. Most were from before Lisa's illness, camping trips, birthday celebrations, ordinary moments made precious by her absence. "Your wife was beautiful," Eleanor commented softly. Mike nodded, swallowing the lump that still formed in his throat 3 years later. "Lisa loved taking pictures, said we needed to capture the good times to help us through the bad." Eleanor's gaze lingered on a photo of Lisa holding a newborn Penny. She was wise. "My late husband felt the same way." She turned to Mike. "How did she pass, if you don't mind my asking?" "Cancer," Mike said simply. "It happened fast. 6 months from diagnosis to—" He couldn't finish the sentence. Eleanor nodded, understanding in her eyes. "I lost George to heart failure 5 years ago. 47 years we were married." For a moment they stood in silence, two strangers connected by shared loss. "Let me help you set up the couch," Mike said finally, moving to pull out the hide-a-bed. The metal frame groaned in protest, and Mike winced at the worn mattress with its visible springs. "Sorry it's not more comfortable." "Nonsense," Eleanor replied. "I've slept in far worse places." Mike raised an eyebrow, finding that hard to believe given her refined manner and expensive clothing. Seeing his expression, Eleanor smiled. "You'd be surprised at the twists and turns a life can take." As Mike gathered sheets and blankets from the hallway closet, Eleanor wandered into the kitchen. When he returned, she was looking at the community college acceptance letter he'd left on the counter. "Business administration," she read aloud. "Is this yours?" Mike felt his cheeks warm with embarrassment as he set down the bedding. "Yeah, I was taking classes part-time, but with the kids and 2 jobs, it's just not practical right now." "What would you do with the degree?" Eleanor asked, genuine interest in her voice. Mike shrugged as he began making up the couch. "I've always wanted to open my own auto repair shop. I'm good with cars, learned from my dad. There's a need for an honest mechanic in this town." He stopped, feeling foolish. "It's just a dream." "Dreams are important," Eleanor said seriously. "They give us something to work toward." Mike didn't respond as he finished tucking in the sheets. His dreams had taken a back seat to reality long ago. Now his only goal was making sure his kids had food on the table and opportunities he never had. "The bathroom is down the hall if you need it," Mike said, changing the subject. "Towels are in the cabinet under the sink. I leave for work at 6:30, but I can show you how to get back to your hotel before I go." "Thank you," Eleanor said. "I don't want to disrupt your routine." Mike smiled tiredly. Routine was disrupted the day Lisa died. "We just make it up as we go now." He gestured to the couch. "Get some rest. Morning comes early around here." As Mike turned to leave, Eleanor called out softly, "Mike, thank you for your kindness tonight." "It's rarer than you might think." He nodded awkwardly, unused to gratitude. "Good night, Eleanor." In his small bedroom, Mike set his alarm and collapsed onto his bed without bothering to change out of his work clothes. The ceiling had a water stain from the time the upstairs neighbor's pipe had burst. The landlord had fixed the pipe, but never repainted the ceiling. Mike stared at the stain, his mind racing despite his exhaustion. The electricity bill was overdue. Penny needed new shoes. The car was making that strange noise again. And now there was a stranger sleeping on his couch, an elegant, elderly woman who seemed as out of place in his apartment as a diamond in a coal mine. Sleep claimed him eventually, but it felt like only minutes had passed when his alarm blared at 5:45 a.m. Mike groaned, silencing the noise before it could wake the kids or their guest. He lay still for a moment, gathering the energy to face another day, then forced himself out of bed. After a quick shower, he dressed quietly and padded to the kitchen to start coffee. To his surprise, Eleanor was already awake, the couch neatly made up, sitting at the small kitchen table with a notebook and pen. "Good morning," she said cheerfully. "Hope you don't mind, but I found the coffee. Thought I'd have it ready for you." Mike blinked in surprise. The kitchen was tidier than he'd left it last night, and the scent of fresh coffee filled the air. "You didn't have to do that." "I'm an early riser," Eleanor explained. Always have been. Business habits die hard. What business were you in? Mike asked, pouring himself a cup of the surprisingly good coffee. Eleanor smiled enigmatically. Investments mostly. Helping businesses grow. Before Mike could ask more, Zach appeared in the doorway, hair sticking up in all directions, eyes still heavy with sleep. Dad, is that coffee? Too young, Mike and Eleanor said simultaneously, then looked at each other in surprise before laughing. Zach rolled his eyes dramatically. Worth a try. Hi, Eleanor. Good morning, Zach. Sleep well? The casual domesticity of the scene struck Mike as surreal. This elegant woman chatting with his son in their shabby kitchen, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Penny joined them soon after, clutching her teddy bear and rubbing her eyes. Unlike her brother, she was immediately wide awake when she remembered their guest. You're still here, she exclaimed happily. I am indeed, Eleanor replied with a warm smile, and I was just about to ask your father if I could make breakfast for everyone before I leave. As a thank you, Mike started to protest, but Eleanor held up a hand. I insist. I saw eggs and bread in your refrigerator. How about French toast? The children's enthusiastic response made Mike's objection die on his lips. He glanced at the clock. There was time before he needed to leave for work. All right, but let me help. Together they prepared breakfast, moving around the small kitchen in a surprising harmony. Eleanor asked the children about school while she dipped bread in the egg mixture, and Mike manned the stove. For a brief moment, the apartment felt full of life in a way it hadn't since Lisa died. As they sat down to eat, Mike noticed how effortlessly Eleanor engaged with his children, asking Zach about his science project and listening to Penny's elaborate story about her class pet, a hamster named Peanut. There was nothing condescending in her manner. She spoke to them with the same respect she showed Mike. This is yummy, Penny declared, maple syrup dripping down her chin. Can Eleanor stay and make breakfast every day? Mike gave his daughter a gentle look of reproach. Eleanor has her own life, sweetie. She was just staying until the rain stopped. Actually, Eleanor said, dabbing at her mouth with a napkin, I was wondering if I might impose on your hospitality for just a little longer. I've decided to postpone my return to the hotel. There are some lovely parks in this town I'd like to explore, and I could use a day away from business matters. Mike hesitated. I have to work today, both jobs. Oh, I wouldn't expect you to entertain me, Eleanor assured him. I'm quite capable of amusing myself, and perhaps I could make dinner for you all this evening. As a proper thank you, the offer was tempting. Mike couldn't remember the last time he'd come home to a cooked meal he hadn't prepared himself. Still, something felt off about the situation. Why would you want to stay here? He asked bluntly. This isn't exactly the Ritz. Eleanor's expression grew thoughtful. Do you know, Mike, in my line of work, I'm surrounded by people who want something from me. Always asking, always needing. It's refreshing to be with people who offered help without any idea of who I am or what I might give them in return. She smiled at the children. Besides, your children are delightful company. Zach beamed at the compliment while Penny giggled. I don't know, Mike said slowly. I don't want to take advantage, but you wouldn't be, Eleanor insisted. In fact, I'd consider it a favor. Hotels can be so impersonal. Mike glanced at his children's hopeful faces and found himself nodding. All right, but only if you're sure. Completely sure, Eleanor replied firmly. After breakfast, Mike wrote down his cell phone number and Mrs. Wilson's number next door in case of emergencies. The kids catch the school bus on the corner at 7:30. I usually get home around 9 p.m. He hesitated, feeling strange about leaving a stranger in his home, yet somehow trusting her completely. We'll be fine, Eleanor assured him. Go to work. Don't worry about us. As Mike left the apartment, he glanced back to see Eleanor helping Penny tie her shoes while Zach gathered his homework. The scene was so ordinary, yet so unexpected that Mike found himself blinking back sudden tears. He'd been carrying the weight of single parenthood for so long that he'd forgotten what it felt like to have help, to have another adult in the house who cared about his children. Throughout his shift at the hardware store, Mike found his thoughts returning to Eleanor. Who was this woman really? Why was she alone in Pine Grove? What had she been writing in that notebook this morning? Despite the questions, he couldn't shake the feeling that her essence in their lives, however temporary, was somehow significant. During his lunch break, he called home, half expecting to find that Eleanor had left after all. But she answered his phone on the second ring. "Thomas residence," she said pleasantly. "It's Mike," he said, feeling oddly relieved. "Just checking in." "Everything's fine here," Eleanor assured him. "I've been enjoying the quiet. Your home has a very peaceful energy to it despite its modest size. It feels lived in, loved." Mike swallowed hard. "Lisa used to say that too, that a house is just a building, but a home is where the heart is." "A wise woman," Eleanor replied softly. "Don't worry about dinner. I found some chicken in your freezer and vegetables in the crisper. I hope you don't mind." "No, that's fine," Mike said, surprised at how normal this conversation felt. "I should get back to work." "The kids get home around 3:30. I'll be here," Eleanor promised. When Mike ended the call, he stood for a moment in the employee break room, wondering at the strange turn his life had taken in less than 24 hours. Yesterday he'd been a struggling single dad, exhausted and overwhelmed. Today he felt a strange lightness, as if someone had briefly taken some of the burden from his shoulders. "Thomas, break's over," his manager called, breaking into his thoughts. With a sigh, Mike pocketed his phone and returned to work, the mystery of Eleanor temporarily pushed aside by the demands of the day. But as he stocked shelves and answered customer questions, a small spark of hope had ignited in his chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time. The diner was unusually busy for a Tuesday night. Mike wiped sweat from his forehead as he balanced 3 plates along his arm, weaving between tables with practiced ease. His feet ached and his back protested each time he bent to set down an order, but he maintained a friendly smile. Tips were better when customers thought you were happy to serve them. "Order up," the cook called, sliding 2 more plates onto the counter. Mike glanced at the clock. 8:15 p.m. Less than an hour until his shift ended. His thoughts drifted to home, to the strange reality that Eleanor would be there with his children. He'd called twice during his dinner break, and everything seemed fine. Penny had chatted excitedly about the cookies they'd baked, and Zach had grudgingly admitted that Eleanor had helped him understand his math homework better than Mike ever had. "You all right there, Mike?" his coworker Darla asked, nudging him as she passed. "You've been smiling at nothing for a full minute." Mike shook himself. "Just thinking about getting home." Darla raised an eyebrow. "You sick or something?" "You're never eager to leave." "Just tired," Mike replied, picking up the next order. But the truth was more complicated. For the first time in years, he was looking forward to going home to something other than exhausted children and a silent apartment. When his shift finally ended, Mike practically ran to his car, a 15-year-old sedan that consumed more oil than gas. The drive home seemed longer than usual, anticipation building with each mile. As he climbed the stairs to his apartment, he could smell something delicious, a rich, savory scent that made his stomach growl despite having nibbled on fries throughout his shift. He opened the door to find his living room transformed. Not physically. The furniture was the same worn pieces, the carpet still threadbare. But the energy was different. Soft music played from his old radio, and the children's toys had been neatly organized in the corner. Zach sat at the coffee table, focused intensely on what looked like a model airplane kit that Mike was certain they didn't own before today. "Dad." Penny spotted him first, running from the kitchen with flour on her cheeks. "We made pot pie and cookies," and Eleanor showed me how to fold napkins like swans. Mike hung his jacket on the hook by the door, taking in the scene with bewilderment. Where did the airplane kit come from? Zach looked up, his face lighting up despite his attempt to seem casual. "Eleanor got it. She said it was a thank you gift for letting her stay. It's cool, right? It's a P-51 Mustang World War II fighter plane." "It's very cool," Mike agreed, a twinge of something, embarrassment, pride, concern, twisting in his chest. He couldn't afford such gifts for his son, and while he was grateful, it also highlighted the gap between his means and what appeared to be Eleanor's. Eleanor emerged from the kitchen, wearing one of his old aprons over her still immaculate clothes. "Welcome home, Mike. Dinner's almost ready. The children have been wonderful helpers." Mike stood awkwardly in his own living room, feeling like a guest. "You didn't have to do all this." "Nonsense. It's the least I could do." She gestured to the kitchen. "Would you like to wash up before we eat?" The kitchen, like the living room, was cleaner than Mike had seen it in months. The table was set with his mismatched dishes, but somehow they looked charming rather than shabby. A homemade chicken pot pie sat in the center, golden and fragrant. "This is..." Wow, Mike managed, overwhelmed. Eleanor smiled. It's just dinner, Mike, nothing fancy. But it was fancy to him. To a man who usually fed his children frozen pizza or spaghetti because he was too tired to cook properly. He washed his hands at the sink, noticing that even the stubborn stain around the faucet had been scrubbed away. Dinner was like something from another life. The pot pie was delicious, the crust flaky and the filling rich with vegetables and tender chicken. The children ate eagerly, Penny chattering about her day and Zach occasionally chiming in with details about his new model. Mike found himself relaxing, the weight of his exhaustion lifting as he listened to his children sound genuinely happy. Eleanor knows lots of stuff, Dad, Penny announced between bites. She helped me with my spelling homework and told me stories about places she's been. She's been to Paris. That's in France. Is that so? Mike looked at Eleanor with renewed curiosity. Eleanor nodded modestly. I've been fortunate enough to travel extensively throughout my life. Business often took me abroad. What kind of business? Mike asked again, still unsure what Eleanor actually did. I run a company that invests in other businesses, she explained simply, particularly those that show promise but need capital to grow. Mike nodded, though the concept was somewhat abstract to him. His financial knowledge extended to balancing his checkbook and stretching his paycheck until it screamed. After dinner, to Mike's surprise, Eleanor shooed him to the couch. The children and I will clean up. You've been working all day. Too tired to argue, Mike sank onto the couch. The cushions seemed to embrace him, and he felt his eyes growing heavy. From the kitchen came the sounds of running water, clinking dishes, and Penny's laughter as Eleanor apparently entertained the children with more stories. Mike must have dozed off because the next thing he knew, the apartment was quiet, and Eleanor was sitting in the armchair across from him, her notebook open on her lap. The children are in bed, she said softly as he blinked awake. Penny wanted you to come say good night, but you were sleeping so soundly I didn't have the heart to wake you. Mike sat up, rubbing his face. What time is it? Just past 10, he groaned. I never miss saying good night. Not if I can help it. They understand how hard you work, Eleanor said gently. Zach told me you never miss their school events, even if it means taking unpaid time off. Mike shrugged uncomfortably. They're my kids. That's what parents do. Not all parents, Eleanor observed. Many prioritize work over family time, especially in my circles. There was something in her tone that made Mike look at her more closely. Your circles sound pretty different from mine. Eleanor smiled faintly. Yes, I suppose they are. She closed her notebook and set it aside. Tell me something, Mike. If money were no object, what would you do with your life? The question caught him off guard. What do you mean? Exactly what I said. If you didn't have to worry about paying bills or putting food on the table, what would you do? Mike leaned back, considering. It had been so long since he'd allowed himself to dream beyond surviving the next week. The next month, I'd finish school, he said finally. Get my business degree. Open that auto shop I mentioned. Make sure the kids could go to college if they wanted. He paused. Buy a house with a yard. Penny wants a dog. Simple dreams, Eleanor noted. But there was no judgment in her voice. Simple doesn't mean easy to achieve, Mike replied, a hint of defensiveness creeping in. No, Eleanor agreed. Sometimes the simplest dreams are the hardest to reach, particularly when you're carrying so much on your shoulders. Mike looked away, uncomfortable with her perception. We manage. Yes, you do, admirably. Eleanor leaned forward. But managing isn't the same as thriving, is it? The question hung in the air between them. Mike didn't answer. Couldn't answer without admitting how often he felt like he was drowning. I hope you don't mind, Eleanor continued when the silence stretched too long, but I took the liberty of looking at your college acceptance letter more closely today. The program looks excellent. Why haven't you enrolled? Mike gave a short, humorless laugh. Tuition, books, time, take your pick. All solvable problems, Eleanor said thoughtfully. Maybe in your world, Mike replied, more sharply than he intended. He immediately regretted his tone. I'm sorry. That was rude. It was honest, Eleanor corrected, and honesty is something I value highly. She tapped her notebook. Do you know what I was writing today while you were at work? Mike shook his head. I was making notes about Pine Grove. It's a lovely town with considerable potential for growth. The downtown area could be revitalized with the right investments. The industrial park on the edge of town has several vacant buildings that could house new businesses. And there's a distinct lack of quality auto repair services in the area. Mike stared at her, confused by the turn in conversation. Why were you making notes like that? Eleanor smiled enigmatically. Let's just say I'm always looking for promising opportunities. A knock at the door interrupted them. Mike frowned, checking his watch. Who could that be at this hour? He opened the door to find Mrs. Wilson from next door looking apologetic. Sorry to bother you so late, Mike, but that faucet started leaking again. It's dripping right into my cookie jar. Mike suppressed a sigh. I'll grab my tools. Eleanor rose from her chair. Mrs. Wilson, isn't it? We met briefly yesterday. I'm Eleanor. The elderly neighbor peered at Eleanor with undisguised curiosity. Yes, I remember. The lost lady. Not lost anymore, thanks to Mike's kindness, Eleanor replied pleasantly. Would you like some tea while Mike fixes your faucet? We could get to know each other better. Mrs. Wilson's face lit up at the prospect of company and gossip. Well, that would be lovely. As Mike gathered his toolbox, he marveled at how easily Eleanor had inserted herself into their lives, as if she belonged there. He followed the chattering women to Mrs. Wilson's apartment, listening as Eleanor skillfully drew out the older woman, asking about her life in Pine Grove, her family, her opinions on local matters. By the time Mike had fixed the leaky faucet, a temporary solution at best, the fixtures were ancient. The two women were talking like old friends. Eleanor had somehow extracted Mrs. Wilson's entire life story. From her childhood in rural Michigan, to her late husband's job at the now-closed paper mill, to her 3 children who lived in different states, but called faithfully every Sunday. You'll have to excuse me, Eleanor said finally, checking a delicate watch on her wrist. It's getting late and we should let you get some rest, Mrs. Wilson. Oh, call me Betty, Mrs. Wilson insisted. And you must come for coffee tomorrow. I make an excellent coffee cake. I'd be delighted, Eleanor replied warmly. As they walked the few steps back to Mike's apartment, he shook his head in amazement. You certainly made an impression on Mrs. Wilson. She doesn't warm up to people easily. People generally enjoy talking about themselves, Eleanor observed. All you need to do is listen with genuine interest. Back in the apartment, Mike realized how late it had gotten. You should take my bed tonight, he offered. That couch can't be comfortable. Eleanor waved away his concern. The couch is perfectly adequate. Besides, I'm only staying one more night. I really should get back to my hotel tomorrow. Mike felt an unexpected pang of disappointment. Right, of course. Unless... Eleanor paused, considering. I've quite enjoyed my time here. Your children are wonderful and Pine Grove is charming. Would it be an imposition if I stayed just one more day? I'd be happy to continue making myself useful. Mike hesitated, torn between propriety and the undeniable lift Eleanor's presence had brought to their home. I couldn't ask you to keep cooking and cleaning for us. You're not asking. I'm offering, Eleanor pointed out. Besides, I haven't felt this purposeful in quite some time. My own children are grown, my grandchildren scattered across the country. It's nice to feel needed. Put that way, Mike could hardly refuse. All right. One more day, Eleanor beamed. Wonderful. Now you should get some rest. You look exhausted. As Mike prepared for bed, he found himself wondering again about this elegant, mysterious woman who had appeared in their lives like a character from one of Penny's fairy tales. There was clearly more to her story than she was sharing. But Mike was too tired to puzzle it out tonight. In the darkness of his room, Mike stared at the water stain on the ceiling and thought about Eleanor's question. If money were no object, what would he do with his life? The answer came more easily now in the quiet of the night. He would create a stable, happy home for his children. He would build a business he could be proud of. He would live a life that honored Lisa's memory while still moving forward. Simple dreams, as Eleanor had said. But dreams that seemed just a tiny bit closer tonight than they had yesterday. As sleep claimed him, Mike's last coherent thought was a strange one. For the first time since Lisa died, the apartment felt like a home again, filled with warmth and possibility, and it had taken a lost stranger in the rain to make him see what had been missing. Wednesday morning dawned bright and clear, the rain of Monday night a distant memory. Mike woke before his alarm, surprised to find himself feeling rested despite the long hours he'd worked the day before. The apartment was quiet, the children still sleeping. He padded to the kitchen in search of coffee, only to find Eleanor already there, dressed immaculately in the same clothes she'd worn for 2 days, yet somehow looking fresh and unwrinkled. "Good morning," she greeted him warmly. "Coffee?" Mike nodded gratefully, accepting the steaming mug she offered. "You're up early again." "Old habits," Eleanor replied with a smile. "I've never needed much sleep. Too many thoughts in my head, I suppose." Mike took a sip of coffee, savoring the rich flavor. "You make better coffee than I do, and I've worked at a diner for 3 years. "It's all in the timing," Eleanor said, turning back to the stove where she was scrambling eggs. "And using the right amount of grounds." They worked in companionable silence, Eleanor finishing breakfast while Mike prepared lunchboxes for the children. It felt strangely domestic, like a well-rehearsed dance between two people who had known each other for years instead of days. "I was thinking," Eleanor said casually as she plated the eggs, "that I might take the children to the park after school today, if that's all right with you. The weather is lovely, and they mentioned there's a nice one with a playground near their school." Mike hesitated. Letting Eleanor stay in his home was one thing, entrusting her with his children was another. Yet something told him she was trustworthy, despite knowing so little about her. "They'd like that," he said finally, "but you don't have to. You're our guest." Eleanor waved away his concern. "I'm hardly a guest anymore. More like a temporary roommate. Besides, I enjoy their company. Children have a way of seeing the world that adults often forget." Before Mike could respond, Zach appeared in the doorway, followed closely by a sleepy-eyed Penny. "Is that eggs?" Zach asked hopefully. "Real eggs, not the powdered kind from the food bank." Mike winced inwardly at his son's candor, but Eleanor didn't miss a beat. "Fresh eggs with cheese and herbs from the little market down the street. I took a walk early this morning and picked up a few things." Penny climbed onto her chair, sniffing appreciatively. "It smells yummy." Breakfast was a lively affair, with the children more animated than usual for a school morning. Eleanor had a way of engaging them, asking questions that made them think and really listening to their answers. Mike found himself joining in, laughing at Penny's description of her art teacher's wild hairstyles and offering suggestions for Zach's science project. As they were finishing, there was a sharp knock at the door. Mike frowned, checking the time. "It's too early for visitors." When he opened the door, he was surprised to find a tall, serious-looking man in an expensive suit standing in the hallway. The man's eyes widened slightly at Mike's appearance, worn t-shirt, faded jeans, and 3-day stubble. "Can I help you?" Mike asked, immediately self-conscious. The man cleared his throat. "I'm looking for Eleanor Montgomery. I was told she might be here." Mike blinked in surprise. Yes. She's here." He turned to call into the apartment, but Eleanor was already approaching, her expression unreadable. "Robert," she said, her tone giving nothing away. "How did you find me?" The man, Robert, looked relieved. "GPS on your phone, ma'am. When you didn't return to the hotel last night, we became concerned. The driver said he lost track of you during the rainstorm Monday evening." "As you can see, I'm perfectly fine," Eleanor replied crisply. Robert's gaze moved from Eleanor to Mike, then passed them both to the children watching curiously from the kitchen doorway. "Yes, ma'am. However, there are several urgent matters requiring your attention. The board meeting has been moved up to tomorrow morning, and the lawyers are waiting for your decision on the Westfield acquisition." Mike felt like he'd stumbled into someone else's conversation. "Board meeting? Acquisition?" He looked at Eleanor with new eyes, finally seeing what should have been obvious all along. The expensive clothes, the refined manner, the way she spoke about investments and business opportunities. This wasn't just any elderly woman who had gotten lost in the rain. Eleanor sighed, then turned to Mike with an apologetic smile. "I'm afraid my little vacation has come to an end. Mike, this is Robert Chen, my personal assistant." "Personal assistant," Mike repeated faintly. "Would you give us a moment, Robert?" Eleanor asked. The assistant nodded stiffly. "Of course, ma'am. I'll wait in the car. We've booked you on the 11:30 flight back to Chicago." As Robert left, an awkward silence fell over the apartment. The children looked between the adults, sensing the shift in atmosphere. "Kids, go brush your teeth and get your backpacks ready for school," Mike said quietly. Once they were gone, he turned to Eleanor, questions tumbling through his mind. "Who are you, really?" Eleanor's expression softened. "Exactly who I said I was. Eleanor Montgomery. What I didn't mention is that I'm also the CEO of Montgomery Industries, a global investment firm with assets of approximately $14 billion. Mike felt the blood drain from his face. 14 billion. Give or take a few million, Eleanor said, as casually as if discussing the weather. I was in Pine Grove looking at potential locations for a new regional office. We're expanding our presence in smaller markets. She smiled ruefully. I have a habit of slipping away from my security detail when I want to explore a place properly. Robert tends to hover, and people behave differently when they know who I am. Mike sank onto the couch, trying to process this revelation. So when you got lost in the rain, I was genuinely lost, Eleanor assured him. My phone battery had died, and I'm afraid my sense of direction isn't what it once was. Your kindness in taking me in was unexpected and quite refreshing. You could have told me who you were, Mike said, a hint of accusation in his voice. Eleanor sat beside him. Would it have made a difference? Would you have treated me differently if you'd known I was wealthy? Mike wanted to say no, but honesty compelled him to nod. Probably. I wouldn't have let you sleep on this lumpy couch for starters. Eleanor laughed, a warm, genuine sound. And that's precisely why I didn't tell you. For 2 days I wasn't Eleanor Montgomery, CEO and billionaire. I was just Eleanor, a lost old woman who needed help. Do you know how rare that is in my life? To be valued for myself, not my money or influence? Mike could see her point, but something still bothered him. The gifts for the kids, the groceries. Was that charity? No, Eleanor said firmly. That was gratitude, and perhaps a bit of selfishness on my part. I enjoyed feeling like part of a family again, even temporarily. She looked around the small apartment with genuine affection. My home in Chicago is 6 times the size of this apartment with a staff of 8, but it hasn't felt like a home since George died. This place, with its mismatched furniture and children's artwork on the refrigerator, this feels like a home. Mike didn't know what to say to that. The idea that a billionaire would envy his cramped, shabby apartment seemed absurd, yet the sincerity in Eleanor's eyes was unmistakable. I should pack my things, Eleanor said, rising from the couch, such as they are. Right, Mike agreed, still trying to wrap his head around the situation. While Eleanor gathered her few belongings, Mike helped the children finish getting ready for school, fielding their curious questions about the man in the suit. Is Eleanor in trouble? Penny asked worriedly. No, sweetheart. She just has to go back to her real life. She has an important job. More important than staying with us? Penny's lower lip trembled. Mike knelt to her level. Different, not more important. Eleanor has responsibilities, just like I have responsibilities to you and Zach. When Eleanor emerged from the bathroom, her minimal toiletries packed in a small bag Mike had lent her, the children immediately surrounded her. Do you have to go? Zach asked, his attempt at casualness failing to mask his disappointment. I'm afraid so, Eleanor replied gently, but I've enjoyed every minute with you both. Will you come back? Penny's question hung in the air, loaded with more significance than the child could know. Eleanor exchanged a look with Mike before answering. I certainly hope so. The goodbyes were brief but emotional. Eleanor hugged both children tightly, promising to send postcards from Chicago. Mike walked her to the door, acutely aware of how quickly their lives had become intertwined and how strange it would feel when she was gone. Thank you, Eleanor said simply, standing in the doorway. For everything. It was nothing, Mike replied automatically. Eleanor shook her head. It wasn't nothing, Mike, it was everything. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a business card, pressing it into his hand. If you ever need anything at all, call this number. It's my private line. Not my assistant, not my secretary. Me. Mike looked at the elegant card with its embossed gold lettering. I won't need to call. Probably not, Eleanor agreed with a small smile. You're remarkably self-sufficient. But keep it anyway. For the children's sake, if not your own. With one last look at the apartment, Eleanor stepped into the hallway where Robert was waiting to escort her to the waiting town car. Mike watched from the window as she entered the sleek black vehicle, her posture straight and dignified. Just before the car pulled away, she looked up at his window and raised her hand in a small wave. Then she was gone, leaving Mike standing in his apartment that suddenly seemed emptier than it had just 3 days ago. Dad? Zach's voice broke into his thoughts. We're gonna miss the bus, Mike shook himself. Right, let's go. The day passed in a blur. At the hardware store, Mike found himself reaching for his phone during breaks, half expecting to see a message from Eleanor. At the diner, he automatically set aside a role that Penny particularly liked. Before remembering, there would be no elegant elderly woman at his dinner table tonight. It was strange how quickly he'd become accustomed to her presence, to having another adult to talk to at the end of the day. Mrs. Wilson stopped by during his dinner break, full of questions about Eleanor's sudden departure. "Such a lovely woman," Mrs. Wilson sighed. "She promised to send me a recipe for her lemon tart. Do you think she will?" "If she said she would, she will," Mike replied, surprised by his own certainty. When he finally returned home that night, the apartment was quiet and dark. No delicious smells from the kitchen, no soft music from the radio, just the familiar silence he'd lived with for 3 years. The children were subdued as he helped them with homework and prepared a simple dinner of mac and cheese, a far cry from Eleanor's homemade pot pie. After tucking them into bed, Mike sat alone on the couch where Eleanor had slept, turning her business card over in his fingers. The whole experience felt like a dream. Had a billionaire CEO really spent 2 days in his humble apartment, cooking meals and helping his children with homework? It seemed impossible now in the ordinary quiet of a Wednesday night. Mike sighed and tucked the card into his wallet. He wouldn't call. What could he possibly say to someone like Eleanor Montgomery? Their worlds were too different, their lives too separate. The past 2 days had been a strange detour from reality for both of them. But now they were back on their respective paths. Still, as Mike prepared for bed, he couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had happened, that his life had been nudged in a new direction by this chance encounter with a lost woman in the rain. It was a ridiculous thought, of course. Nothing had changed. He was still a struggling single dad with 2 jobs and too many bills. Eleanor's brief presence hadn't altered that reality. Yet as he drifted off to sleep, Mike found himself wondering what Eleanor was doing now. Back in her world of board meetings and billion-dollar decisions, was she thinking of them too? Of the small apartment where, by her own admission, she had felt more at home than in her mansion in Chicago. Tomorrow would be Thursday, just another day of work and responsibility. But for the first time in years, Mike fell asleep not with a sense of dread at the endless grind ahead, but with a strange, unexpected feeling of anticipation, as if something important was waiting just around the corner. 2 weeks passed and life returned to its familiar rhythm. Mike worked his 2 jobs, helped with homework, paid what bills he could, and postponed the ones he couldn't. The children stopped asking about Eleanor after the first few days, though Penny still insisted on folding the paper napkins into swans whenever they had guests, which wasn't often. The only tangible reminder of Eleanor's visit was the model airplane displayed proudly on Zach's dresser, now fully assembled, and painted with painstaking care, and the business card tucked into the back of Mike's wallet, untouched since the day she left. On Friday afternoon, Mike was restocking shelves at the hardware store when his manager approached with an unusual expression, somewhere between confusion and concern. "Mike, there are some people here to see you," he said, lowering his voice. "In suits. They look important." Mike frowned, setting down the box of light bulbs he'd been unpacking. "Did they say what they want?" The manager shook his head. "Just asked for you by name." "They're waiting in the office." Mike followed his manager to the small back office, mind racing. Was it about his taxes? The overdue electric bill? He couldn't think of anything else that would bring important people in suits to his workplace. When he entered the office, he found 2 people waiting for him. A middle-aged man and a younger woman, both dressed in expensive business attire. The woman held a leather portfolio, and both wore expressions of polite professionalism. "Mr. Thomas?" the man asked, extending his hand. "I'm David Hargrove, and this is my colleague, Sophia Williams. We represent Montgomery Industries." Mike felt his heart skip a beat at the name. "Is Eleanor okay?" The question seemed to surprise them both. "Mrs. Montgomery is fine," Sophia assured him quickly. "She sent us to speak with you regarding a business matter." "A business matter," Mike repeated, still confused. "I don't understand." David gestured to the chairs. "May we sit? This might take a few minutes." Mike nodded, taking the seat behind the desk while the visitors sat across from him. He was acutely aware of his worn uniform shirt with the hardware store logo and the dirt under his fingernails from unpacking inventory. "Mrs. Montgomery has spoken very highly of you, Mr. Thomas," David began, his tone conversational. She was particularly impressed by your work ethic, your integrity, and your ambition to open your own automotive repair business. Mike blinked in surprise. She told you about that? Sophia smiled. Mrs. Montgomery is very thorough in her assessments of potential investments. Potential investments? Mike felt like he was several steps behind in the conversation. David opened his briefcase and withdrew a folder. Montgomery Industries has recently acquired a property on the edge of Pine Grove, the former Wilson Manufacturing building. Mrs. Montgomery believes it would be an ideal location for a combination automotive repair shop and training facility. Mike's mind whirled, trying to process what he was hearing. What does this have to do with me? Everything, Sophia said simply. Mrs. Montgomery would like to offer you the opportunity to establish and run this business. Me? Mike's voice cracked on the word. But I don't have the capital, the education. The capital would be provided by Montgomery Industries, David explained calmly. As for education, we understand you've been accepted to the business program at Pine Grove Community College. Mrs. Montgomery has arranged for a full scholarship, should you choose to accept it. Mike felt like the floor was tilting beneath him. I don't understand why she would do this. The two representatives exchanged glances. Mrs. Montgomery believes in investing in people with potential, Sophia said carefully. She was quite impressed with you during her unexpected stay in Pine Grove. She believes you have the skills, determination, and character to make this venture successful. And if I fail? Mike asked bluntly. Mrs. Montgomery anticipates a learning curve, David replied diplomatically. The proposal includes a guaranteed salary for you during the first 3 years, while the business establishes itself, along with comprehensive benefits including health insurance for you and your children. The mention of health insurance nearly brought Mike to tears. Penny's asthma medication alone cost more than he could afford most months. This isn't charity, Sophia added, as if reading his thoughts. Mrs. Montgomery expects the business to become profitable within 3 to 5 years, at which point you would begin purchasing equity in the company through a structured arrangement. Eventually, you could own it outright. Mike ran a hand through his hair, overwhelmed. I don't know what to say. You don't need to decide immediately, David assured him. We've prepared a detailed proposal for you to review. He handed Mike the folder. We'll be in town until Monday if you have questions. As they rose to leave, Sophia placed a business card on the desk. This is the contact information for the local attorney Mrs. Montgomery has retained to represent your interests in this matter. She's already been paid in full, so please don't hesitate to consult with her before making your decision. Mike stared at the card, then at the folder, then back at the two representatives. Why me, really? There must be thousands of people more qualified. David's professional demeanor softened slightly. Mr. Thomas, in my 15 years working with Mrs. Montgomery, I've learned one thing. She has an extraordinary ability to recognize potential, both in businesses and in people. She hasn't been wrong yet. He smiled. And between us, she mentioned that your chicken pot pie was the best she'd ever tasted. That alone speaks volumes about your character. After they left, Mike sat in the office for a long time, the folder unopened before him. His manager poked his head in once, took one look at Mike's shell-shocked expression, and quietly withdrew. Finally, Mike opened the folder and began to read. The proposal was comprehensive, detailing everything from the business plan to the renovation costs to the equipment needed. There were projections, timelines, and a clear path to ownership. It was everything Mike had ever dreamed of, presented as a practical business opportunity rather than an unattainable fantasy. At the back of the folder was an envelope with his name written in elegant handwriting. Inside was a short note. Mike, this is not charity or pity. This is an investment in someone who showed kindness without expectation of return, who works tirelessly to provide for his children, despite overwhelming odds, and who has dreams too long deferred. The world needs more people like you, and more businesses run by people who understand the value of honest work. Pine Grove needs a good mechanic, and your children need a father who can be present in their lives. I found my purpose in building businesses and helping others build theirs. Perhaps this opportunity will help you find yours. With respect and gratitude, Eleanor. Peace. Penny asked if I would return someday. Please tell her that I most certainly will, especially if she continues practicing those swan napkins. Mike read the note twice, then carefully folded it and placed it back in the envelope. His shift wasn't over for another 3 hours, but for once he couldn't focus on work. He found his manager and for the first time in 3 years asked if he could leave early. Family emergency? The manager asked, concerned. Family opportunity? Mike corrected, a smile spreading across his face. The walk home seemed shorter than usual, his steps lighter despite the weight of the folder under his arm. His mind raced with possibilities, calculations, and questions. By the time he reached his apartment building, he had mentally rearranged their entire lives a dozen times. As he climbed the stairs, he heard familiar voices, his children, home from school. For a moment, he paused outside the door, savoring this last normal moment before everything changed. Then he took a deep breath and opened the door. "Dad." Penny looked up from her coloring book, surprised. "You're home early." Zach emerged from the bedroom, equally confused. "Is something wrong?" Mike set the folder on the coffee table and sat down, gesturing for his children to join him. "Nothing's wrong. In fact, something might be very, very right. But I need to talk to you both about it first." They listened wide-eyed as he explained the proposal in simple terms. A new business, a chance to go back to school, better hours that would let him be home for dinner most nights. "Would we have to move?" Zach asked, practical as always. "Maybe eventually," Mike admitted, "but not right away. And we'd stay in Pine Grove. Could we get a dog if we move?" Penny asked, zeroing in on what was clearly the most important aspect of the situation. Mike laughed, feeling lighter than he had in years. "Maybe, we'll have to see. Is this because of Eleanor?" Zach asked perceptively. Mike nodded. "Yes, she saw something in us, in me, that made her want to help." "She was nice," Penny declared with the simple certainty of childhood. "I knew she was special." "She is," Mike agreed. "But here's the thing. This is a big decision and it would change a lot about our lives. I'd be in school part-time and building the business will take a lot of work at first. But you'd be home more?" Zach confirmed, and Mike was struck by how much his son had noticed and understood about their current situation. "Eventually, yes, and we'd have health insurance right away." "For my breathing medicine?" Penny asked. "Exactly for that," Mike confirmed, his throat tightening. The children exchanged looks, having one of those silent conversations that siblings sometimes share. "We think you should do it." "Dad," Zach announced, speaking for both of them. "Yeah," Penny agreed enthusiastically. "And then when Eleanor comes to visit, we can show her our new shop. And maybe our new dog." Mike laughed, pulling them both into a hug. "I didn't say yes to the dog yet." "But you didn't say no," Penny pointed out shrewdly. Over the next 2 days, Mike met with the attorney Eleanor had hired, pored over every detail of the proposal, and asked countless questions of David and Sophia. By Sunday evening, his decision was made. Monday morning found him standing outside the former Wilson Manufacturing building, staring at the faded sign and broken windows. The place was a mess. It would need extensive renovations before it could become the business he envisioned. Yet as he stood there, Mike could see it clearly. The garage doors open to welcome customers, the training area where he could teach young people the trade, the office where his kids could do homework after school. "What do you think?" David asked, joining him outside the building. "I think it's perfect," Mike replied honestly. "It needs work, but the bones are good." David smiled. "That's exactly what Mrs. Montgomery said you'd say." He handed Mike a set of keys. "Congratulations on your new business venture, Mr. Thomas." As David walked back to his rental car, Mike stood alone before the building, keys in hand, still trying to process how completely his life had changed in the span of a week, all because he'd offered shelter to a stranger caught in the rain. His phone buzzed with a text message from Mrs. Wilson, who was watching the kids. "Someone delivered a package for you. The children are very excited." Curious, Mike drove home to find a large box in the living room, the children practically bouncing with anticipation. "Open it, Dad," Penny urged. Inside the box was a custom-made sign, Thomas Auto Repair and Training Center. Below that, in smaller letters, "Where honesty meets expertise." There was also a smaller package addressed specifically to Penny. Inside was a beautifully illustrated book about dogs, with a note attached, "For research purposes. Choose wisely, Eleanor." Mike laughed, shaking his head at Eleanor's thoroughness. The woman thought of everything. That evening, after the children were in bed, Mike sat down and wrote an email to the address David had given him, Eleanor's private account. Eleanor, the sign is perfect. The opportunity is overwhelming. The dog book was a masterstroke. Penny hasn't put it down. I've accepted your proposal, though I still can't quite believe it's real. Thank you isn't enough, but it's all I have right now. So thank you. Not just for the business opportunity, but for seeing possibilities that I'd stopped believing in. You're welcome in our home anytime, whether it's this apartment or wherever we end up. Penny is practicing her napkin swans in anticipation. With gratitude, Mike Pez, the pot pie recipe was my wife's. She would have liked you. He hesitated before pressing send, still half convinced that the whole situation was an elaborate dream from which he would soon awake. But the keys on the table beside him were solid and real, as was the sign propped against the wall and the folder full of possibilities. 3 days ago, he had been a struggling single father with deferred dreams and mounting bills. Now he was a small business owner with a future he could actually look forward to, all because of a moment of kindness on a rainy night, offered with no expectation of return. As he finally pressed send, Mike thought about the strange paths life sometimes takes. How a simple choice, to help or to walk away, can sometimes alter the entire course of a life. Eleanor had called it an investment, but Mike knew it was something more profound. A recognition of shared humanity. A hand extended across the vast divide of circumstance. The rain had stopped. The visitor had gone, but the ripples of that chance encounter would continue to spread outward, touching not just Mike and his children, but everyone whose lives would intersect with their new venture. A lost woman, a kind offer, a night of shelter, simple acts that had changed everything. Mike picked up the keys to his new business, feeling their weight in his palm, the weight of opportunity, of responsibility, of a future suddenly rich with possibility. Tomorrow would bring challenges, hard work, and uncertainty. But for tonight, in the quiet of his small apartment, Mike allowed himself to simply feel grateful for the strange and wonderful turn his life had taken. And somewhere in Chicago, in a penthouse overlooking the city lights, an elegant elderly woman smiled as she read his email, already making plans for her next visit to Pine Grove.